All right, we are live, and I'm very excited to introduce you all to today's guests. On today's interview, I interview a journalist, an editor, a consultant, an educator, and a guide to all things Jewish psychedelic. She's written for the Be Here Now Network, Iron Press, Rolling Stone, Playboy, and Vice. She's the author of the book Exile and Ecstasy, Growing Up with Ramdas, and Coming of Age in the Jewish Psychedelic Underground, published by Hay House Publishing this past November. She's also the co-founder of the Jewish Psychedelic Summit and co-founder of Double Blind Magazine, which features untold stories about the expansion of psychedelics around the globe. Welcome to the Winner Circle, Madison Margolin.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited to connect. The goal of these conversations, as I mentioned, is really to uplift, inspire, and empower everyone tuning in to move forward with greater faith and belief in themselves on their hero's journey. And the first question I ask every guest really sets us up on a positive note. And that is right here, right now. What do you love about your personal world, Madison? Not about the external world, a lot of stuff going on the outside, but what do you love about your internal world, your personal world?
My personal world, like my internal, like inside my psyche, or like in my community, because
Which
they're different things.
whichever you prefer. I like both of those. So let's start with your community and then what's going on in your internal world, in your
Yeah.
psyche.
Yeah, I mean, in the community, I feel like I'm surrounded by such interesting, growth-oriented people who all have such stories and are such characters, and I I love the people who, I get to see on a regular basis. So that's one thing. And then
Okay.
my internal world specifically is, I'm just in in learning about kind of psychedelics and spirituality and different sort of like psychological techniques. I'm, learning to take stock of like um my own internal world with regard to like my feelings, my sort of psychosomatic sensations, my own relationship to God and, spirituality. So yeah.
Amazing. I'm excited to delve deeper into both those topics. But first, I listed a whole bunch of titles. Um, but those are not who you are. These are roles you play. And of all these roles you play, then there's other ones I didn't even list, like a daughter, a friend, a community member. And of all the roles you play, what would you say would be the overarching mission that guides you in all those things?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think so much of what I'm interested in is the way that people are able to connect with their own souls or to identify as a soul and, in a human experience. And so a lot of my work kind of connects back to that theme in some way, just in terms of helping people recognize where they are in their own spiritual paths um and yeah, like what they're here on earth to do, in this lifetime.
Hmm. That's so fascinating. When did you bring awareness to this? When did you understand or just beginning to unravel that thread of like, what is a soul? Why are we here?
I was always really connected to it, like ever since I was a kid. I just felt pretty like aware of God and curious about what is a soul. And, my parents would tell me things like my soul chose them before I was even born, to come down and be in the family that I apparently chose. So yeah, I mean that's sort of my whole life I've been very curious about this. And when I started doing psychedelics around the age of 18, it just kind of put that into, more obvious terms.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm really excited to explore your childhood. Your parents, they were very big in the psychedelic movement, in the cannabis industry and with Ramdas. Um, So how was that like growing up with parents kind of pretty different from like the majority of the parents of your peers at school, I'm sure. Um yeah, and let's start there. And then was there resistance? Like often we kind of push away from our parents, especially when we're teens and we try to explore different beliefs. So let's just get into that.
Yeah, I was initially sort of like embarrassed by my parents. Like they were the most different parents, like among, people I went to school with and so forth. And, they were always, the house sometimes would like smell like weed, and they were always having hippie parties, and people were dressed with like Hindu clothes, or not Hindu, but like Indian clothes, but they weren't Indian, like they were like white people, or, Jews from New York or LA. And I was just like, why are you guys dressing like this other culture? And it wasn't like that I was judging it. I was just like, what, but I always said to myself, like, what are they looking for in Hinduism and Buddhism and all these other cultures that they're not finding within what they were initially exposed to Jewishly. And so I didn't, it's not that I rejected what my parents in, exposed me to. In fact, I was very, I got very into yoga, and you know, also like, in Berkeley as a college student, got really into like the whole hippie thing, and felt familiar because I felt like that's how I grew up with hippies. But I also, like I said, I had said to myself, like, I wanted to know if what they were searching for in these other cultures was also available like within our own backyard. And so that's what led me into like trying to understand Judaism better.
And so when did that process start? Like just researching and self-study. Um, was that as a child, a teen, an adult when you're at Berkeley?
Um, yeah, I'd say like as a teenager, and then more so when I was in college. I wasn't so much into Judaism as was into psychedelics. And so I got really into, I mean, I was always into Judaism. Like I always felt very like aware of being Jewish, and I was, always connected to God, but I wasn't like studying Judaism so much. Um, but yeah, I started, again, started doing a lot of research, like academic and experiential research, you could say, with psychedelics. And I always got to this very sacred sort of spiritual place with it. And, um, ended up living in Israel after I graduated college, and, started to learn a little bit more about that. And in grad school is really when I started understanding like the Jewish component better. Every student in my reporting 101 class was assigned to report on a different ethnic community, and because I was Jewish, my professors made me report on the Hasidic community in Brooklyn. And so there I met people who were experimenting with psychedelics, and I said to myself, like, how, if you're coming from such a religious background and Judaism is such a big part of your life, how could how could psychedelics not factor into your experience? Or sorry, how could Judaism not factor into your psychedelic experience? And it was at that point that I started to look into the more like psychedelic and mystical components of Judaism.
Mm-hmm. So Judaism is something I am not too familiar with. Like there's not many Jewish people that I grew up with or in my area. Um, so like what would you want to tell someone that doesn't know about Judaism um, and like the Jewish culture? What is like some important things for us to understand?
I mean, there's just so many different types of Jews. There are Jews who believe in God, there's Jews who don't believe in God, there are Jews who, have their roots, Jews whose traditions come from Europe, Jews whose traditions come from the Middle East, from Spain, from Iran. So there's no like one, it's sort of considered like one nation with like 12 different tribes, so to speak. Um, but I would say that like at the core, the word Yisrael means to struggle with God, to wrestle with God. And so I think like a very Jewish experience is to like really reckon with like spirituality and to struggle. There's a lot of strife and trauma, and it's just not an easy narrative associated with being Jewish. And so a lot of the traditions that we have to do with both struggle as well as with redemption and resilience. And so that's really like part of the Jewish story and the Jewish experience is like this kind of tension between difficulty and and, you know, bad things happening, and like also how we're able to like move past it and get to a more redemptive place.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and really enjoying learning more about Judaism and the Jewish culture in your book, Exile and Ecstasy, which is available now on Audible. That's where I'm listening to it, and you could also buy it in bookstores, on Amazon, wherever you else could get books. And we're going to delve into that more. But I'm definitely curious to examine Judaism and your Jewish background just a little bit more. It's a big part. It seems to be a fairly big part of your identity. And I also have like a varied cultured background, Chinese Canadian, French Canadian, and Métis, so indigenous. So I have a big mix, and I remember doing 23andMe, and like it marked me all over. My background is all over the globe, and yoga is what I'm most passionate about. In yoga, the discipline of freedom, the eighth limb of yoga, samadhi, it brings us to the understanding and the realization that we are one. So how do you deal with that knowledge from your psychedelics, that we are one, and from your yoga practice, but then also maintaining your identity, like I am Jewish versus I am one. Do you understand what I'm saying?
That's a really good question. So I also grew up with yoga. I've been doing it for literally 20 years at this point.
Yeah.
Um, and the philosophy of my father's guru was like all one, you know, Maharaji or Neem Baba. Like there are these like bumper stickers that all of the followers of the guru put on their cars, all, you know, all one. And so what I understand and also in Judaism, it's like there's this whole concept of God is one. Like meaning to say, like the way I experience it is not only that there's one God, um, you know, but like that everything is kind of a manifestation and an expression of like this singular, unified, divine energy. And so each of us has a soul, and our soul is kind of like this fractalized piece of like that singular God or universal kind of consciousness. And um and so, you know, when I connect with my soul, I'm able to move past like the boundaries of like my individualism and my ego and whatever. And then also, you know, like the, you know, the soul in me can more identify with the soul in you. Like, you know, when you're identified with that, like that piece of your own like divinity, everyone has divinity, right? Everyone comes from God, and everyone has a soul. So you're able to connect on that level that's like beyond just like the individualistic boundaries. You know, then again, there is like your identity, right? And it's like my soul was placed into a like a Jewish body. Your soul was placed into a body that comes from, you know, that's comes from all of these different lineages, and DNAs and so forth. And so the body is a very unique and individualistic experience, to be in a body, right? Like no one else is in your body. So I think that's where identity kind of stems from, is what what does this physical body bring to the experience of the soul on earth, both in terms of like the way that I present now, right? Like the color of my skin, or, you know, what community I've been placed into and whatnot, but also like the DNA that I carry from like the literal lineage and genes and trauma and all, you know, all sorts of stuff that kind of makes up the body. So does that sort of answer the question?
Yeah, for sure. Like, let's just continue to unravel this thread. I feel it's like very, very fascinating. And it's what I'm kind of understanding and working with now in my personal world is how everything I perceive is unique to me. For example, like the Madison Margolin that I'm connecting with now only exists in my world. Like the Madison Margolin to your mother, your father, to your friends, to yourself. It's all a completely different person. It is based on our samskaras, the patterns we've have got grooved to us from our education, our culture, our lived experience. So yeah, everything really is just a reflection of the self from our unique lens, and it's with us to do what that we wish. And it's beautiful that we get to like unravel the many threads however we choose and pursue whatever like lights us up and makes us feel good. And I think that's what it's about. Um, just enjoying this journey from the bodies we're in, and recognizing that we're so much more than these bodies. And psychedelics have helped me see, um, as well as many teachers, and I'm excited to delve now into psychedelics and some of the teachers you've met along the way. So you've mentioned you first experienced it with psychedelics at 18. So let's get there. But how did you not experience, like, you grew up around cannabis, like in high school a lot of kids use cannabis, just different recreational drugs. So what did your parents teach you about um drug use, like in quotation drug, medicine use, um that prevent, like, that you allowed your brain to develop and only begin experience that when you're 18?
Yeah, I mean, it's not like my parents were promoting drug use in their kids. It was like very natural, those like yeah, adults have wine, like my parents smoke weed, like that adults smoke weed, right? Like there was no like stigma around it. And I knew that my both my parents, but especially my mom had had like a lot of psychedelic experiences when she was younger, and they sounded like really scary, some of them, like passing out on angel dust in the middle of Greenwich Village in the 70s, or, being on like a hike in upstate New York on acid and saying that she almost walked off a cliff, like random, like really scary stuff. Which made me be like, wonder, like, is she crazy, or are these substances like really like require a lot of caution? But I also knew that they had been so influential in so many people's lives who were close to me, who I had grown up with. So, yeah, like I said, there was no stigma. I mean, my dad would joke, like, know your drug dealer, like you should always know that you have a safe source. But he's also a criminal defense lawyer. So, like, he was never promoting that I should use like an illegal substance, especially because he was so aware of the law and dealing with people who were getting busted and so forth. So, my own sort of relationship with psychedelics in particular was very independent. Like, I didn't really involve my parents in that. I told them, I mean, when I did it, I definitely shared with them after the fact that I had done this, but it's not like I trip with my parents or anything like that.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to insinuate that either. Like, I was just more curious about, like, what conversations do you have with them regarding drug use when you're younger? Like, did they say, like, maybe wait until your brain is fully developed,
They
until you?
never said anything about it. They don't talk about it like that. Like I said, the extent of it was like my mother telling me about like pretty strange acid trips when she was in her 20s. Like
Oh,
storytelling.
so when you are a parent, if that is in your cards, or even just if a parent asks you, like, what would you advise youth about the use of psychedelics, before, like, the brain's fully developed, before they're an adult, before they're able to kind of integrate into the body that they're in?
Like if I were to talk to my kids about psychedelics.
Yeah, or just if you're talking to a high school about psychedelics, like, do you think there's benefits of you using psychedelics, like, as a youth, or do you think it's better, into, like, when the brain's fully developed and you have a better understanding of, like, you
Yeah.
who you are?
Yeah, I don't think like I think you should know yourself really well before that you do psychedelics. And that said, like psychedelics have also helped me get to know myself better. So it's sort of like, which one is it? So if I were to
Uh-huh.
talk to kids about psychedelics, it would be more like this is something that sometimes people use as a medicine, and sometimes people use it in prayer, and sometimes adults use it for fun, but it affects your brain, and if your brain's not fully developed, you don't know what it's going to do to you, and you should wait until you your brain is more mature and ready for such an experience.
Yeah, I agree. And I also feel another use of psychedelics is people use it as a band-aid. They use it to numb themselves from or to face situations. And one of the doctors I really respect, Dr. Gabor Mate, he applauds that. And he says, congratulations, like you found something to help you ease your pain. And I think that's not a bad thing. But it's like when we use these chemicals, these medicines to put the band-aid, it's like using that superpower, that boost to delve into the wound. Like, why are we needing to self-medicate? And I think that's where I think so. I think just being conscious about your use of psychedelics is very important. And I think you mirror that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not something to do willy-nilly, and I know people use psychedelics for fun, but like it's really not guaranteed to be fun at all. So, you know, like it's, the thing is like I wouldn't want my kids experimenting with psychedelics if they were like 15 years old, but at the same time, I know people who have been experimenting with psychedelics since they're 15, and they are who they are because of those experiences. So I feel very mixed on it, like I would never promote it for like underage people, and the people I love are who they are because probably because they got started in underage settings. So
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think also important, so important is like one's mindset and the setting, like setting going into these experiences. And that's something very important to um, just bring awareness to prior to taking psychedelics, in my opinion.
yeah, exactly. Setting is 100% the most important thing.
Okay, so now you're 18. What was the first psychedelic you used, and what was that experience like? And then how did that continue to unravel?
Yeah, I did mushrooms, and I had done a lot of research on it before. I wrote, it was my first semester of college, and I did this whole research paper for in my first semester in college about psychedelics. So I was like, okay, I read, Aldous Huxley and Ram Dass and Leary and, Acid Dreams by Martin Lee and I forget, I think Shalane is the other author on that. But I basically like done a lot of academic research, and also like again, like having grown up in an environment where all the adults had been really influenced by psychedelic experiences, like I felt that I was ready. I was also, like a student at Berkeley, which is a very, I was in the hippie scenes there. And so I was home for winter break after my first semester and ended up buying all these mushrooms from this guy at a New Year's party, and decided to do the mushrooms with two friends who also had never tripped before. And my older sister was our trip sitter, and she solicited a sort of family medical marijuana doctor to help her trip sit. And he had been actually a former Orthodox Jew and also like massive tripper guy himself. Like he had a ton of psychedelic experience. So I was with very seasoned people in a very held, kind of protected environment, which, because I felt so safe, I was free to just explore, like the psychonaut ethers. And it was really like one of the best days of my life. And I just learned so much about kind of just like consciousness and like what be here now actually means. Growing up in a community surrounding Ram Dass, it was very much like be here now, be here now. And I just like didn't get it. Like I was like, what is that? What does that feel like to be here now? Like it just felt like very flat. So yeah, so um that's kind of what I experienced.
So was your understanding of be here now more of a feeling and embodiment that you integrated into your being? That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, exactly. Like I felt like what does be here now actually feel like in your body?
And how would you describe that from your knowledge now, from where you are today? With words? Because like we can only do so much with words to explain a feeling and embodiment, but with words and um, your talent in writing, how would you explain what that means, be here now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just like a regulation of the nervous system, if that makes sense. Like, just your body like being really calm and regulated and not anxious and like feeling like you can breathe easy and take in your surroundings and like feel a sense of like love and warmth like in your body. Um, and like the ability to like sit still and like not be anxious or antsy or agitated, which I am like I'm very it's and that's not just whether it's just me or whether it's genetic. It's there's so many jokes about like Jewish anxiety, but really like an overactive nervous system is very common in Jewish people. So it was really healing for that reason.
And that's understandable. It's like multi-generational, and that's a whole nother topic. But right now, like I'm just curious to understand and ask you about some of your foundational tools that you use to keep you in that be here now space. So yeah, what are some of your fundamental like self-care and just wellness and holistic practices that remind you, that reattune your frequency to be here now?
Yoga, number one. I do yoga as often as I have the opportunity to, but multiple times a week at least. Um, I like try to just do a body scan sometimes. Like I'll just be in the middle of my day and like notice I'm getting a little bit worked up and I'll stop and be like, just breathe for a second and then like try to feel like my body from like my feet and my shoes and my, like tights around my legs and my seat in my chair and the waistband around my hips and like I'll go through everything that I just like trying to notice my sensation of being in a body. um I have different like little like prayer type rules and meditations that I do. um like I also work with essential oils because it gets me to like notice like it helps me breathe. Like when you're breathing in a scent, like you're focused a little bit differently than if you're just like breathing normally. So those are just like very basic tools.
Yeah, what are some of your favorite essential oils? That's a unique answer. I haven't heard many people talk about that, but
Um,
I I I enjoy them as well. So yeah, what are your favorite essential oils?
yeah, I have, I mean, like in my purse, I carry with me something called Past Tense. It's by doTERRA. I also get
Yeah.
headaches sometimes, so it's like it's good for headaches. Um, I keep lavender with me, though it's kind of like a little basic. I also keep patchouli with me. And then my favorite essential oils are blends made from this like amazing like spiritual like spiritual aromatherapist named Abram Sand. Um, and he just like kind of like does research on like essential oils and scents in like biblical times and like what was used for spirituality. And so he just makes these like really magical scents. And I have a few of his blends, so I use those too.
Thank you for sharing. I look forward to trying out some of those. Let's talk yoga. It's something that, like as I mentioned, I'm super passionate about, and my practice has changed over the years. It started with Bikram yoga, and then I started exploring all the different types, yin, restorative, vinyasa, and more presently, it's like my real big focus is taking the yoga off the mat and like embodying the yoga, being the yoga, exploring like the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, where the 196 aphorisms, only two pertain to asanas, physical posture, and it's also just better familiarizing myself with the eight limbs of yoga, which again, like the asanas, the poses, is just like such a small, teeny piece of what yoga is. What has your evolution of yoga look like, and what does it look like for you today?
Yeah, I mean, my mom is all the stuff you're talking about. My mom's a yoga teacher, and she's also done a lot of like she's very into like the academic, like, like the literature of yoga, right? Like, so what you're referring to. And so my dad also is religious about doing yoga like every single day. And so yoga is like really a family value. And it was one of the few things that I really respected in my parents because, they'd always be like, say like, be here now, or sort of like say these spiritual things that I was like, what's the meaning behind it, or how are you actually embodying this? But through yoga, like you're literally embodying it. Like there's no way to not be here now when you're, deep in an asana practice and, trying to get yourself into positions that are just, require a degree of focus and mind body presence. So yeah, I mean, I guess to answer your question is like yoga really does feel like a metaphor for life. Um, and like I think Krishna Das says, like practice when you can, so you have it when you can't, or
Yeah.
something like that. And just like the ability to like you just learn so much about life on the yoga mat, like just the ability to like stay calm, to be graceful, to like breathe through something difficult, to like maneuver and be like strong and flexible at the same time. Like these are all qualities that you're going to need in life in general. So so yoga has been just like a huge teacher for me in that sense, and also just like creating like a conversation and awareness with my body, like no, like waking up to parts of yourself, your physical self that you didn't even like really know were like that you wouldn't necessarily engage with otherwise um if not for that practice, and
Hmm.
like breathe into it. It's huge. It's saved my life. I mean, I've done a lot of psychedelics and nothing has been as powerful as doing yoga regularly.
I agree. I agree. So what does your physical asana practice look like? Like what styles of yoga are you currently practicing and passionate about?
Yeah, I mean, I just really like vinyasa flow, which is basic, but I'm pretty like I like to dance, and like I move fast. I mean, again, this is like my own sort of like if I'm in a yin class or something, like I get a little bit like antsy. And I also like when I like to be challenged. Like I want to like I don't want my mind to wander. And so I obviously that's the challenge. Is like I should be able to sit in a yin class and deal with the wandering mind, and that's part of like whatever. But on a day-to-day basis, and I'm like, I want to feel good, and yoga makes me feel good. Usually it's through vinyasa. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah.
Beautiful. And I think like it's also one thing that yoga helps me is compassion. So having compassion for myself when I'm in like that pose or that style that is like, oh, I would like, for example, when you're in yin and like your mind's ants and you don't want to be there, but just having compassion for yourself and just doing your best to be here now. And um yeah,
There's
no, thank
no competition in yoga. You're not even competing with yourself. And I think that's like a huge relief. Where there's like no such thing as perfect. There's no such thing as like repeating like the same way you did one class versus the other class. Like it just gives, it's like everything you're bringing to the table on that particular day is like what is, and it's okay. And I think that's like such a huge philosophy to hang on to. And also just like, because I started doing yoga when I was 12 years old, like my associations with it are so much from my family that like coming back to a yoga mat just feels like coming home, like on so many different levels. So yeah.
amazing. And then it's like finding that home everywhere you go, no matter where, what city, which place, where, like whatever emotional state you're in, it's knowing that home is available to you whenever you choose. And that's like what, like, one of my favorite and greatest teachers, Esther Hicks, she talked in Abraham, he talks about like attuning our frequency to the radio station we wish to embody. And I feel like that's what yoga really offers an opportunity to do, is to find that frequency of home, of peace, of oneness. And then it's taking that everywhere you go in every place. You've also mentioned a lot of your teachers, Aldous Huxley, Ram Dass, Tim Leary, your parents, and many more. So let's take a moment to acknowledge some of your most impactful teachers Who were they, and what were your primary takeaways you learned from them that you've embodied into who you are?
Yeah, I'd say my two most impactful teachers have been Ram Dass, whose philosophy it really all comes down from the guru named Karoli Baba or Maharaji, and also Rebbe Nachman, who's kind of a Hasidic master, and they're sort of like the inverse of, they're not the inverse, but they're very related on some levels. Like Ram Dass is all about like be here now, like like the opposite of dissociation, and Reb Nachman is more, he says like the most important thing is to be happy, and like true happiness is also rests on like freedom, like where you don't require anything to be happy, but you're able to like just harvest it from within and like from your spiritual connection, and that the lowest places, the furthest you feel from God are like actually like carry the highest potential for you to connect from there. Um, and to not be afraid, and like, a lot of like just really basic stuff that is like so like on a daily basis. It's like, oh, like how am I harvesting happiness? Like, am I being present? Am I fighting fear? Like, or not fighting fear, but am I transcending fear? You know, how am I like cultivating a relationship with God that is, you know, the more faith you have, sometimes the less fear you have, right? Like if you feel like everything's in God's hands and you truly believe that like God is good and God has your back, then like why should you be afraid? And again, that's an oversimplification, and I'm not, there's, you could poke holes in that very easily and show all the horrors of the world and ask where is God, and I think that's part of the struggle. When I said earlier Yisrael means, or Israel in English, like it means to wrestle with God. I mean, I think those are the questions that we're wrestling with, is where's God right now? Like where was God in the Holocaust? Like where was God during all these moments, but then also being able to like still harvest like this inner strength and energy and connection in spite of or because of like what's difficult, I think is part of the practice of being human, and what so much of like my own spiritual and religious philosophies have taught me.
And to answer that question, where is God? I think he's everywhere. And it's just about our reattunement of our lens to see that the culture and we grew up in the corporate consumer world of North America, the little baby world that is our culture. It has instilled fear in us and in the generations and generations prior to Cell. Um, and yeah, so we just have to kind of wipe all that off and reattune our lens to remember that God is everywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, so let's talk about Ram Dass. I love one of the stories you shared in your book about Ram Dass giving you the middle finger. Um, and people can check out your book to hear that story. I think it's such a great story. What's another memory you have of Ram Dass?
I mean, my childhood memories of him are all just like coming through the house, like hanging out with my parents, like just very mundane, like, I was the kid in the background and the adults were doing their thing. Um, Ram Dass did officiate the marriage ceremony of my dad and my now former stepmother. I mean, I still refer to her as my stepmom, but we're divorced now. Um, so I remember that, and I was pissed about it because at the time I was like still very raw from my parents' divorce, and like now here Ram Dass is like officiating this new marriage, and so I had a very complicated relationship toward Ram Dass throughout my childhood, and it took me like time to really appreciate, what his wisdom was, because again, in practice, I was just kind of experiencing him as like another one of my parents' friends. Um, so I was kind of critical.
Yeah, it's very interesting the lens you got to perceive him from. As you remember back upon him today, from your personal experience with him, but just in his teachings, his recordings, his readings of yours that you read, how do you remember him? How do you like to remember him now?
Now, I mean, I feel like he's like an uncle, he's very familiar. Hamish, like homey, like familial, like also just like another person on his own journey, like I don't, people like would go to Hawaii and kiss his feet and, treat him like he's the guru, and like he is definitely a spiritual leader in his own right, but he's not the guru, like he's a student of the guru. And I think that's a really important distinction.
For sure. And he would say we are all the guru.
Yeah, that too. But he was a devotee of Neem Karoli Baba.
Beautiful. Okay. You mentioned fear. Um, Fear is what holds a lot of people back from pursuing their must, We've been conditioned. You should do this, like by society, by culture, by our schooling, by our parents. When there's a must, and some traditions say we're born with that must, we're born with that purpose inside us. And fear holds people back. They're at that, and there's often people, they're stuck at that crossroads of should, you should do this, you should play it safe, you should get a 9 to 5 job, you should save for your retirement, etc. And the must, like, which is like, I should like publish my first work, or I should go to that yoga teacher training, or I should move to LA from New York, or I should move to New York from LA. But fear holds us in our place. What have you learned about transcending fear, and how do you continually do that today?
Yeah, I mean it's the choice. It's like on a very like daily, hourly basis, like I have to look at what's holding me back or what I want to do versus the fears that are blocking me from doing it. And then like decide, am I choosing fear or am I choosing to have faith? And that's like what really strengthens your relationship with God, and like with creation and creator is like the choice. Like it's not, it's definitely, it's in Hebrew you would say avoda. It's like, it means spiritual work. Like it's not something that just comes easy. Like it's a discipline of consciousness. And a lot of it is also that fear lives inside our bodies. And so it's like easy to say like, oh, don't be afraid, as if it's like a mental mechanism. But so much of it is also a programming of the nervous system. And so um it's like, okay, so what am I doing to regulate my body? Like, well, am I doing my yoga? Right? Like, am I dancing? Am I doing things that like is going to enable my body to be able to calm down so that I can also then like get the mind to follow and like overcome those fears?
And as Viktor Frankl taught us, like, that is our most powerful tool, choice, and it's something that no one can ever take away from us. And just sharpening that sword and remembering that. Neem Karoli Baba, he taught Ram Dass and all his devotees and followers to love everyone and tell the truth. What does love mean to you?
That's such a hard question. Such a hard and easy question. Yeah, to just sort of like accept, like on a very basic level, is just like fully accept someone and like embrace them for everything they are, like to see their soul and to accept their, the limitations of their own humanity, and just say like it's okay. And then like beyond that is to really like put yourself out there for someone, like to not make it about you, and to really like see the ways that you can be of service to like better someone else's life. I guess you do that to different degrees with other, with family or loved one, with, there's like the love of like among neighbors, and then there's the love that you have for family or partner or something. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
It all starts here with the self, from what
Yeah.
I've learned. Every interview, I close with the final two questions, and we've gotten to that point. First question: through it all, through all the highs and lows that is this life experience, that is this hero's journey, what do you feel has been the greatest life lesson you've learned on your path that you feel called in this moment to share with me and the listeners?
There's a mantra, sort of. I don't know if mantra is not the word, but it's like it's whatever. It's like a phrase that's associated with Rabbi Nachman or some of his followers. It's called Nanach, or the full phrase is Nanach, Nachman, Nachman, Me'eman.
Okay.
My response is just Nanach, which is just like, just go for it. Like, don't be afraid. Like, love God, have faith. Like Nanach, like holds all of that. Just dance. Like, it's okay. Like, be happy. Just dance. Like it's very exciting and faith oriented, and just like go for it. And so that's sort of what I would say. It's my biggest lesson is Nanach.
A choice. How do I pronounce that? I want to try to say this with you. How do I
Nah,
say that?
nah, like Nah, nah,
Nah. Yeah.
nach. The CH. NANACH.
Nah.
Nach.
Ah, nah.
Nanach.
Okay, I'll practice that.
Word. Yeah, yeah.
Last question. We examined your past, we examined your present, and let's let's travel to your future. Let's travel to the future, and we'll sit with an 85-year-old Madison Margolin. Who is that woman? Who is that 85-year-old Madison? Where is she? Who is she surrounded by? What is the legacy you've left here in your 85 years, and what are the predominant feelings in your being?
Wow. She's like probably sitting on some mountaintop or something in northern Israel, just vibing out. And she wrote a couple books and has students, around psychedelics and stuff like that. And she has some kids and grandkids, and she's just like connecting and like doing yoga and eating healthy and still going to jams and doing the things I do anyways, but older and more rested.
Beautiful. And what are the predominantly feelings in your being, in your soul, in your essence?
Just like I did it. Like I feel like I gave myself to my work.
So I'm just like invite you to close your eyes and just to embody that place of I did it. I shared myself. I've written books. I've been vibing out. I've lived my best life. I feel good. And I'm going to bring us back to the now. And in the now, that 85-year-old Madison, she sends you a message. What does she whisper in current Madison's ear?
Um, I don't know, just to keep praying for that. Like just to pray it until you embody it.
Beautiful. Well, it's been a pleasure connecting with you, and hearing you share some of your wisdoms and your stories. And you have so much more of that out in your book and in all your writings. People can pick up your book, Exile and Ecstasy, everywhere where books are sold, also on Audible. It's really well narrated by yourself. I always love when the authors of their work read their stuff. It's different than, like, I don't know, some generic narrator. So well done on that, and I hope you continue with that as you move forward and publish more works and books. It means a lot. People could find you at madisonmargolin.com and Madison Margolin on Instagram, which will link to all the different places you write, your websites, and all the amazing things that you're doing. Any last closing words from you?
Just really grateful to be on this podcast, and you asked such good questions. I feel like I was in a therapy session, just so it was perfect. Thank you.
Amazing. We close every interview with a fist bump, a digital fist bump, a stepping into the winner circle, a choice. Boom. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. It's been an honor. I wish you a beautiful day.
Thanks, you too. All right, bye.
Ciao.